Hello everyone, today I wanted to talk to you about ancient Greece. For those of you who aren't that good in geography, Greece is right here. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so Greece nowadays is occupies all this land here and a lot of these islands, but back in 2000 before Christ, or 1000 or 500 before Christ, it involved a much larger region. It involved a lot of territory, and it really extended all over the place. Our story begins on an island called Crete. Why is this important? Because it was here that the first real civilization emerged from the many tribes that already were living in all this land. Now, the Minoan civilization was here in Crete, and basically it was the first real powerful military, economic, and social power in Greece. It was important because it was a maritime power. It had a large fleet, and it dominated the sea. It also had a very large territory. It was under a king and a capital, Knossos, in which very big buildings were built, especially fortifications, which were very advanced for its time. But eventually, it was conquered. It lasted from the 27th century up to the 13th century, when the Mycenaeans conquered it. As you can see, the Mycenaean kingdom includes also Crete. It has Mycenae here as its capital, and it really covered a much larger territory, as well as several islands like Ithaca here, or Rhodes here. Now, the Mycenaeans are very important because they lasted about 200 years, from the 13th to the 11th century, and it was in this period that supposedly they had a great king, and his name was Agamemnon. Now, many of you may know who Agamemnon is. He was basically his story was told by the poet Homer. Homer was a poet, supposedly blind, who wrote two books, you might say, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, the first one is the most important one, the Iliad, because it talks about a war between the Greeks, which were all these guys, against this city here, Troy. It talked about events, it talked about places, it talked about people. It talked about how these people behaved, and what values were important for them, what virtues they respected, and it really was sort of a Bible for Greeks. Why? Because Greeks really thought that all these things were actual history. It was as real as Second World War is to us. They thought of the War of Troy as not fiction. They thought it was actual history, and that meant that it sort of gave all the Greeks in all these lands a sort of a common history, a common culture, a common background. And this is very important because this common background, this common history, later on ended up being very important. This is the Trojan horse, which all of you may know was what allowed the Greeks to conquer ultimately Troy after a long and bloody 10-year war. All these were really, to us, it's really just a very nice story, okay? But for them, it was actual history. So it really was something like what we learn in history books. Mothers told their children about the Trojan horse and the Trojan War, and all the heroes, like Achilles or Agamemnon, for one, that fought in the war. But then the Mycenaeans disappeared. Many historians think that that it was because of barbarian tribes come in from the north and invaded mainland Greece, and eventually even managed to conquer and destroy all of the Mycenaean kingdom. But this allowed, after centuries, the formation of much more local centers of power, and we're talking about the city-state. The city-state is something that is very, very unique as far as world geography is concerned, meaning that in the rest of the world we can see nations arising from the landscape, but never like in Greece. We see so many entities standing on their own in such a close and small territory. Basically, what the city-state was exactly what it sounds like. I mean, it was a city which constituted a state on its own. Okay, and this identity that each state had was very jealously protected, and there were many famously popular cities. There were hundreds, actually, hundreds and hundreds of cities, but some of the most famous are, for example, Athens or Sparta or Corinth or Thebes. But there were really hundreds and hundreds of others. Greece was mainly mountains, and still is mainly mountains, so it's not a very fertile country. However, the Greeks had sort of inherited by first the Minoans and then by the Mycenaeans a sort of maritime spirit, meaning that all Greeks loved the sea. They loved being close to the sea, and most of them, at least, liked having ships and being able to go all over the place on their ship. Which means that their geography was not a problem as far as food is concerned, because all they had to do was become traders and trade food for other products that they could find all over the Mediterranean. And this basically was the main reason why there was a sort of a population boom in the 8th and 7th century before Christ, which led to mass migrations all over the Mediterranean. We can see a lot of different places here. We can see Spain. This is the eastern side of Spain. We have southern France. We have Corsica. We have Sardinia. We have Sicily and Malta. We have the southern tips of Italy. This is all called Magna Graecia. We have which means Great Greece. We also have Albania, Cyrenaica, which has only a relative importance as far as history is concerned. We have, of course, mainland Greece, Crete, Cyprus. We have all around the Black Sea. This is important because it was on the Black Sea, especially up here. This is where the Ukraine is now, that great amounts of grain were produced and exported, and all this food went to feed mainland Greece, which was capable, no matter how populated it got, to avoid famine. And then we have Anatolia, which is nowadays it's called Turkey, and there were settlements all over its coastline. Okay, so another thing that was very important for Greeks was their government. You can probably come up with any type of government, and you name it, there was a version in ancient Greece. We had mainly 3 types of government: tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. What's the main difference between these 3 forms of government? The number of people with power. So tyranny is where one person has power. Now, nowadays we think of tyrants as evil people, evil, violent people, but back then it wasn't necessarily the truth. Usually tyrants were exceptionally charismatic and capable people who were usually selected in times of great crisis, when a city really needed a strong hand, and maybe against a foreign enemy, or just in a time of political unrest. Then we had an oligarchy, which means the power to the many, which means that a portion of the population, aristocracy if you want, or maybe a group of elders, was given power. And then we have the democracy, where ideally everybody has power. Let's see some examples. For example, of tyranny, we have the island of Samos. The island of Samos was in its own time a very powerful island, because it dominated all its local region, and eventually the tyrant which built this local kingdom was executed by the Persians, but we'll talk about the Persians later. One of the most notable things about Samos was that its tyrant built a majestic aqueduct, which basically cut through the mountain from one side to the other to give water to its city. And this was a remarkable feat of engineering. And this, what among other things, was really what set the Greeks apart from the rest of the world, because it was especially in engineering and stuff like that Greeks really stood out and really was very remarkable. Then we have Syracuse right here. Syracuse is on the island of Sicily. At a certain point, it was also the richest and most powerful city in the Greek world. It was led by several tyrants, one after the other. It was also interrupted by periods of democracy and oligarchy, but the most notable moments in its history, it was guided by tyrants. Then for oligarchy, we have an example: Sparta. Sparta was really one of the strangest governments there were, because it was nominally a monarchy. However, the difference between normal monarchies, where we have a king, was that Sparta had two. It had two kings from two separate dynasties of two of the most important families in the city. It also had 5 ephors, they called them, which were men who were the spiritual guides of the city, and it also had 28 elders, which formed the Gerousia, which was a council of elders, an assembly if you want, who decided basically all the various administration things about the city, but also whether or not to go to war. Then of course we have the example of Athens as a democracy. Athens wasn't always a democracy, but at a certain point it was suggested, and people just liked the idea, so they decided to become a democracy. Not everybody was allowed to participate in politics in Athens. For example, only men and only citizens, which means that immigrants who decided to go to rich Athens didn't necessarily become citizens, and therefore weren't allowed to participate in the politics of the city. So, as we've seen, there were a lot of different political entities, and each one was jealous of its culture, of its political organization. All of them had basically the same history, though, as we've said. Also, most of them venerated the same god, even if maybe one city had favorites. For example, one city had Athena. We have the example of Athens, for example. Or maybe another city liked Dionysus, or another one liked Ares, but basically they all had the same gods. Another thing that they were kind of jealous about was their independence, which means that when a Greek city was you might say, conquered by a foreign enemy, there was a lot of sympathy going on for them, and that's exactly what happened for the Ionians. The Ionia is this region here. This is Anatolia, and this is Ionia here. Basically, Greeks didn't like being under the power of a foreign enemy, and in this case, the foreign enemy is the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had started in Iran and had pushed its borders up to the coastline of Anatolia, including Cyprus and including Egypt. So, as you might have already understood, that the Ionians didn't really like to be under Persian control. So, as it happens, they decide to revolt. And the revolt started in Ionia, and that's why it's called the Ionian Revolt. It lasted about 6 years, and it involved an area about like this in Ionia. Then, however, it expanded, and then it expanded even more until it included even the island of Cyprus, which is over here. Now, the Persians we're not going to say that they were used to people revolting, but it wasn't something that they have never heard about. I mean, it's a big empire. They have an enormous empire stretching from Europe basically to the Middle East, to Iran and beyond, and or even Pakistan at a certain point. So in such a big empire, revolts were at least they were predicted. They were it was something that an emperor said, well, it's going to happen sooner or later somewhere. The difference this time was that the revolt was a very big one, a very important one, and it lasted 6 years. So it wasn't something that it was something that really attracted the attention of the emperor. And the Ionians, as we have said, were Greeks, and therefore their revolt really had a lot of sympathy points with all the rest of the Greeks. In fact, they asked help to a lot of them, and Athens, this city here, responded. They sent ships, they sent men, sent resources and supplies, and it eventually led to the Greeks winning a lot of battles and even burning Sardis, which was the capital of the region in that period. The region was called a satrapy. That was how the Persian Empire was organized. And they, basically the Athenians and the Ionians and everybody else, all the other revolting Greeks, they burned Sardis. And that wasn't something that the emperor took very lightly. In fact, it started the Greco-Persian Wars. The Greco-Persian Wars is a period of about 50 years in which Persia really had a vendetta against the Greeks. The burning of one of its capital cities was something that wasn't ever really accepted by the Persians. In fact, they decided to invade, and several times. But let's take a look, for example, at the difference between the armies of the Greeks and the Persians. Now, the Greek soldier is called a hoplite. Okay, it's called a hoplite because it has a round shield, which is called the hoplon. Hoplite, hoplon. Okay, he was armed with a long spear, a sword at his side, had leather or bronze shin guards, a cuirass, and a bronze helmet. This made the Greek soldier very heavy, which means that the Greeks had a lot of heavy infantry. But the greatest strength about hoplite was wasn't the individual soldier, but the formations. The formations, which were known as phalanxes. This was where the front row interlocked its shields with one another, creating a shield wall that was very, very difficult to break. Now, as I've said, the cities were very very jealous of their own identity, and each city had, maybe the largest ones had thousands and thousands of people. However, most Greeks didn't wander much, and in any case, they they spent all their time among their neighbors, which means that everybody knew everybody else within a city-state. So consider this. I mean, you're in a formation, you're this guy, and behind you you have your neighbor, and next to you you have your childhood friend, and this guy over here is your brother. Here's your cousin. So all of these people are people that you've grown up with, that you've known for ages. Think of that. I mean, when you're fighting next to your own brother, next to your own best friend, and over here is your uncle, over there is whatever. So it really gives you a sense of camaraderie. You really have this sense of fighting for your nation, for your city. So the morale of a Greek phalanx was extremely high. Another advantage was that with his large shield, a hoplite would protect not only himself but also his neighbor. Interlocking the shields allowed a hoplite to cover even the back of his neighbor, as well as having his own back covered by the one behind him. Now, the Persian warrior instead was very, very different. Persia got its armies heavily from Media, which you might say is the Middle East in general. But it really got soldiers from all over the place. You had Egyptians, you had Greeks as well, also Greeks. You had Iranians, you had all people from all over the place. Of course, such multicultural army couldn't possibly be as united as the Greek army that we've just shown. Also, you can see that the Persian foot soldier did have, for example, a spear. He had a shield, but the shield, for example, wasn't as large as the Greek shield. It wasn't round. It wasn't meant for a phalanx formation. And he didn't have the heavy armor that a Greek soldier typically had. So even just looking at this picture, we can see how the Persians really were at a disadvantage from the start. So the first real big battle that was fought was Marathon in 490 BC. It saw about 9,000 Athenians and 1,000 allies fighting against a force about 3 to 5 times as big as theirs. Greek historians will say that there was an army of 600,000 Persians, but historians nowadays know that that really can't be the case. The Persian Empire was rich, yes, but it wasn't extremely wealthy enough, at least, to move more than 500,000 men into Europe. So a realistic account can be about 3 to 5 times as large as the Athenian army plus the 1,000 allies. The Athenians really won a major victory against the Persians, and the emperor Darius I, known as the Great. Of course, he was known as the Great not because of the losses he suffered in Greece, but because of other achievements in the rest of his empire. Basically, this emperor was he instructed a slave to whisper in his ear 3 times a day, every day, "Master, remember the Athenians." And it is said that he basically obsessed over this for the rest of his life. So the Persians, however, didn't give up. They attacked again about 10 years later, and this led to basically 3 other battles. However, on the other side of the Mediterranean, we had another theater of war that was going on. We're talking about Sicily. We mentioned Syracuse earlier because Syracuse really was a powerhouse in its own region. However, it didn't have to deal with Carthaginians. It didn't have to deal with Persians. It had to deal with Carthaginians, who who settled on this side, the western side of Sicily. Carthaginians, unlike Persians, were very similar to the Greeks. They were white, just like the Greeks. Even the Iranians were, but they were maybe a little darker in skin. The Carthaginians were Carthaginians were ethnically much more similar to Greeks than Persians were, and they also came from a Phoenician background, which means that they loved the sea, they loved to trade, and however, they had different gods, and they were a united front. The Carthaginians were one political entity. Carthaginians were an oligarchy. It wasn't a kingdom. They didn't have a king, but they had a council of elders, which made all of the most important decisions. So what happened was that this territory was always very contended between the Carthaginians and the Greeks. Having won at Marathon, the Athenians really claimed to be the heralds of the Greek world against the foreigners. The foreigners were known as barbarians. And this really gave a wave of, you might say, racism, meaning that the Greeks were really convinced from that point on that their own race was superior to everybody else's. And this really gave a sense of entity, of unison to all the Greeks in all the Greek world. And basically it backed up Syracuse when it claimed to be the guardian of the West. What it did was it united a lot of Greek cities and fought the Carthaginians, and managed time after time to repel the attacks of the Carthaginians. The wars here are probably not as famous as the wars in Greece, but especially in this middle region, but also extending on either side, we have major battles where dozens of thousands of people die. And for example, whole cities are massacred. We have, for example, Himera was completely destroyed. We have Agrigentum, for example, was also completely destroyed. We have massacres, first done by the Carthaginians, then done by the Greeks, but extremely violent wars. However, the one thing that is noteworthy is that Greeks here too managed to resist a foreign invader. So going back to mainland Greece, we had these three battles here. The first one isn't a major battle, however, it lasted a couple days, because this is the battle of the 300 Spartans. It's probably the most famous battle of the ancient time, where 300 Spartans plus about 1,000 allies managed to close a very narrow pass and refused entry to the Persian army, and the Persian army was forced to try to force the passage, failing until it managed to go around the Spartans and eventually massacre them. Then we have a naval battle, Salamis, where the genius Themistocles, the Athenian admiral, managed to vanquish once again a much larger Persian fleet. And then we have the gigantic land battle, Plataea. This time the Spartans led the coalition against the Persians. And once again, the Greeks vanquished the Persian army. So it is very easy to understand how, at least as a public point of view, Greeks thought of themselves as a superior race who could vanquish whatever invader. As long as he wasn't Greek, they could beat him. But And in this period, Xerxes the Great was the emperor of Persia. He also led about a total, I think, of 300,000 men. He eventually managed to march on Athens and burn the city. Of course, the Athenians fled. They got on ships and they managed to survive, but the city itself was burned. And this eventually it did lead to a victory of the Greeks. However, it did send a scare through all the Greek world, meaning that, oh, look out, we really have this very dangerous foe just across the Aegean. So what its main consequence was that a great coalition started, a great coalition headed by Athens and a lot of other cities, hundreds of other cities, was founded. This was called the Delian League. And Athens was basically building its own empire. Every city member of this league was basically forced to pay taxes. It was forced to give men and ships and increase Athens' power. And Athens really started a golden age because of all this wealth coming in. It also found some new silver mines with which to fill its coffers, you might say. It really started a golden age, and the man behind it was Pericles. Pericles was a man who rose to power at a very young age and really held Athens by hand while it built the Delian League. The Delian League, however, was by all effects an empire. Why? Because, for example, if you didn't belong to the league, let's say you were an island off the coast of Ionia, you might say. And this isn't just an example. I mean, this isn't just theoretical. This is actually what happened in some cases. If you didn't adhere to the league, you were attacked and forced to. So it was an empire, basically, a hegemonic empire, where Athens was exacting tribute for certain advantages. Well, at least nominally, the main advantage was protection. Pericles was a very capable man, and he basically he made Athens the great city that it became. And one of his greatest achievements was this temple of the Parthenon. It was built on the Acropolis, which was a city in the middle of Athens, and it was a gigantic feat of engineering. It was novel because the columns, for example, had a unique technique which allowed them to appear straight from the distance. They were actually a little wider in width, and at the middle you had the stairs who also bowed in towards the middle and bowed back out at the end, so that they looked straight. These sort of visual games. The Parthenon costed Pericles and Athens millions and millions of drachma, which nowadays you can probably say the equivalent cost is billions of dollars. Also, it housed a gigantic statue of the goddess Athena, and the statue also was just as expensive. However, this created a big power, and powerful presence on this side of Greece. However, as we already said, Greeks liked their independence, so a lot of them didn't want to become part of the Delian League or Athens Empire. So another coalition formed, and this was the Peloponnesian League, headed by Sparta. These two opposing factions grew and grew until they couldn't grow anymore without bumping into each other, and this led to the Peloponnesian War. It lasted about 30 years, and it was nominally between Sparta and Athens, but it really involved pretty much all the Greek world. It involved Athens and its allies, and against them there was Sparta and its allies. As you can see, pretty much all the Greek world is some way involved. We have most of the Peloponnese is under Spartan control. There were some neutral areas, but all of the Aegean was involved. Most of the coastline was on Athens' side, but it really involved a lot of cities, and it was sort of a world war, you might say, of Greeks. And what happened was that Sparta and Corinth and Thebes, which were the three major players on the Peloponnesian side, they were land powers. They didn't have large fleets, but their armies were exceptionally strong. Athens, on the other hand, had an unparalleled fleet. It had high walls, it had a very efficient port, and it was able to basically move its fleet all over the coast without anybody managing to challenge it realistically. The first thing that Sparta and Corinth and Thebes did was cut off Athens from the rest of the mainland, which meant that Athens would have to import all its food from the sea. We've already said that, that usually city-states weren't it wasn't uncommon, at least for them, to import large amounts of food from abroad. So Athens was cut off from the land, and it was forced to import food, especially from the Black Sea. However, a long time passed before anybody gained the upper hand. In fact, there wasn't any major battles that anybody won. The main reason behind this was that Sparta dominating the land and Athens dominating the sea meant that nobody really exposed itself much in the other one's comfort zone. And the tipping point was, you might say, when Athens decided to attack Syracuse. Syracuse was an ally, nominally, of Sparta. And the Athenians decided to do this in one of the periods of peace that there was during the Peloponnesian War. Of course, Sparta took this as a provocation, so it declared war on Athens. In the meantime, it had started building, finally, a fleet of its own, and it could finally challenge the Athenians. However, the Athenians were a powerhouse, or at least on the sea, there's nobody that could contend with them. This changed when they attacked Syracuse, because the whole army that they sent was destroyed, and most of them were killed or sold into slavery. Their fleet was also destroyed. So Sparta took this as you might say, they saw the opportunity, and they attacked. They attacked where they knew Athens was vulnerable, and this is in this region here. This is Byzantium. This is the Hellespont. These were very narrow straits that led to the Black Sea, and basically they attacked, and this led to the Battle of the Aegospotami in 405 BC. This was a sea battle that Sparta won, and basically it turned the tide of the war, because now Athens was cut off both from land and from its main food source, which meant that it really risked a famine. And in fact, a year later it surrendered. This starts a Spartan hegemony. Sparta it stopped being a local power. It became a power that dominated over the most of the Greek world. However, the Spartans weren't very good administrators, and from time to time they would just invade people. This didn't sit very well with many of their allies. For example, we have Corinth and Thebes, who refused to participate on a punitive mission against one of the members of the Peloponnesian League. Sparta wasn't very happy with the conduct of a city called Elis, and it decided to attack. But Corinth and Thebes decided not to participate in this expedition. Also, another thing that Sparta did was they decided to invade Ionia for some reason. And they decided to attack, and they also conquered Sardis. They held it for a while. They were bribed into moving up to northwards to another region where the satrap, being a very cunning fellow, instead of openly challenging the Spartans, basically he sent thousands and thousands of gold coins back to Greece, trying to bribe Spartans' allies into betraying it. This led to a war, the Corinthian War, which lasted about 8 years, and it involved several cities. It was basically Sparta against Corinth, Thebes, Athens, and Argos, which was a city around here in the Argolid. As you might remember, Corinth and Thebes were both members of the Peloponnesian League, which fought against Athens, but now they were all united against Sparta. This was not uncommon in the Greek world, that cities would follow their own political agenda and fight on whoever's side they thought would reap the most benefit for their own city. Of course, this war weakened both sides, and it really didn't bring to any really determining battles, and it just contributed to weaken the Spartan hold on the rest of the Aegean and the Greek world. Eventually, Thebes emerged as one of the most powerful cities in the region, and at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, it destroyed the Spartan army with a new technique, an oblique formation, and this revolutionary technique that caught the Spartans completely by surprise and destroyed their army. This allowed the Thebans to enjoy a very brief hegemony of their own in Greece. But you might say that the Battle of Leuctra really put the last nail in the coffin of any single city's ambitions towards regional dominance. You might say that Thebes did enjoy a hegemony for a short period of time, but it really wasn't comparable to the Athenian Empire in its own time and the Spartan hegemony after that. A lot of wars raged all across Greece for a while, until finally the King's Peace in 367 put an end to most of them. The king is actually the Persian emperor. You might be frowning that the Persians were dictating terms in Greece, but however, this is exactly what Greeks did all the time. They switched enemies and friends all the time, and they allowed the Persians to basically dress the role of impartial judges, so that nobody could basically the peace to which all the cities agreed to established that no city could rise as a regional power over other cities. However, this might have ensured peace in mainland Greece. However, it did weaken the situation against foreign invaders. We're not talking about Persia anymore, we're talking about Macedonia. Now Macedon was used to be just a northern tribe that nobody really worried about until this man, Philip the Great. He united Macedon. He became king of Macedon, and he built a professional army, which became the most important and powerful army in the world. He decided to invade Greece, and after a couple of years of campaigning, the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC basically destroyed all the remnants of Greek power. And there was the last coalition, the last stand of Greeks in mainland Greece, but they really couldn't resist. The more united, the better trained, the better disciplined, and even the bigger, simply it was even just bigger army of the Macedonians. And this was basically the end of the independence because of all Greeks, because on this side you had the Persians, and on this side you had the Macedonians now, who controlled basically all of Greece. Is this the end of the story? No, because for about another 100 years, Syracuse and other Greek cities all around the coast of Sicily survived, and until about 212 before Christ, Syracuse remained a very powerful, independent power in Sicily. In fact, in 212, it was conquered ultimately by the Romans, not by the Carthaginians, but by the Romans. So this is the story of ancient Greece, including the story about Greece and Syracuse. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had as much fun listening as I had making this video. Feel free to leave any comments you want, and send me messages if you want. That's totally fine. Thanks for listening.